The rusty hinges of the abandoned trading post door screeched in protest as 29-year-old Eleanor Montgomery pushed it open with the last of her strength. Blood trickled down her temple, staining the collar of her once pristine ivory blouse. 3 days after watching Outlaws string up her husband from the old cottonwood and leave her beaten in the harsh Colorado badlands, she had crawled and stumbled her way to this desolate shelter. Outside, the merciless August sun had baked the earth to a cracked wasteland, stealing every drop of moisture from the air and turning her lips to parchment. As darkness fell on that third night, Eleanor collapsed onto the dirt floor, her throat so parched she couldn't even form the prayers she desperately needed. She had no way of knowing that less than a mile away, Swift Arrow, a Ute hunter returning from the high country, had spotted the thin trail of disturbed dust her dragging feet had left behind. What followed would become a remarkable tale of survival. Against overwhelming odds, a story of healing across cultural divides, and an unexpected alliance that would ultimately bring justice to a lawless corner of the frontier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Colorado Territory, August 1879. Eleanor Montgomery had never planned to become a frontier woman. The daughter of a Philadelphia banker, she had been raised amid refined society, educated at Miss Porter's School for Girls, and expected to make an advantageous marriage to one of Philadelphia's eligible bachelors. But Eleanor had always possessed a rebellious streak that her finishing school instructors had failed to extinguish. When she met Thomas Montgomery, a charismatic mining engineer with wild dreams of striking silver in the Colorado Rockies, her parents had dismissed him as unsuitable. Yet his passionate descriptions of snow-capped mountains and valleys untouched by civilization had awakened something in Eleanor that Philadelphia's brick-lined streets could never satisfy. "You won't last a season out there," her father had warned when she announced their engagement. "The West breaks delicate flowers like you." 4 years later, Eleanor had not only endured but flourished. The small mining camp of Silverdale that Thomas had helped establish now boasted 17 rough-hewn buildings, including a general store they owned together. Though she maintained her Eastern manners and refused to abandon proper grammar, Eleanor had learned to ride astride, shoot a Winchester repeating rifle, and negotiate with the hard-scrabble miners who frequented their establishment, which made the brutal interruption of their life together all the more devastating. It had begun as an ordinary Tuesday. Eleanor was inventorying their latest shipment of supplies, while Thomas calculated figures in the leather-bound ledger he meticulously maintained. The sound of horses outside didn't alarm them. Travelers frequently stopped at their store, the last outpost before the trail climbed steeply into mining country. "Probably the Wilkins brothers, needing more blasting powder," Thomas said without looking up. But when the door swung open, it wasn't the familiar bearded faces of local miners. Who entered? 6 men wearing dust-caked trail clothes and expressions hardened by years of lawlessness stepped inside. The leader, a tall man with a scar that pulled his left eye into a permanent squint, surveyed the store with calculated precision. "You Thomas Montgomery?" he asked, his voice unnervingly soft. "I am." Thomas set down his pencil, straightening to his full height. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" The scarred man smiled without warmth. "Name's Jedediah Blackwell. Here you run the most prosperous store between Denver and the mines." Eleanor felt a chill despite the summer heat. She'd heard that name whispered by miners around campfires. The Blackwell gang had been terrorizing settlements across the territory, always staying one step ahead of the law. "We're a modest operation, Mr. Blackwell," Thomas replied evenly, "serving the local mining community." Blackwell's gaze shifted to Eleanor, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "Not what we heard. Word is you've been collecting payments from those mines for 6 months now. Must have quite a sum locked away. Thomas's shoulders tensed. I believe you've been misinformed. One of Blackwell's men, a wiry fellow with tobacco-stained teeth, snickered. Boss doesn't much appreciate being called a liar. I meant no offense, Thomas said carefully. But we're simple storekeepers. Any money we collect goes right back into ordering supplies. Eleanor edged toward the counter where Thomas kept their Colt revolver concealed beneath a stack of order forms. Blackwell noticed the movement and nodded to one of his men, who circled around to block her path. "Ma'am, I'd stay real still if I were you," Blackwell said, his tone conversational. "Now, Montgomery, we can do this pleasant-like, or we can do it the hard way. My boys are partial to the hard way, but I'll leave that choice to you." Thomas glanced at Eleanor, a silent message passing between them. She could read the calculation in his eyes. They were outnumbered, outgunned. "There's a small safe in our living quarters," he finally said. "It contains our operating funds, about $200. You're welcome to it if you'll be on your way afterward." Blackwell's smile widened. "That's mighty accommodating. Lead the way." Thomas moved toward the back room, the outlaws following. Eleanor made to join them, but the wiry man grabbed her arm. "You stay put, pretty lady," he leered, insurance-like. For 20 agonizing minutes, Eleanor heard muffled voices from the back room. Then came the sound of furniture being overturned, followed by Thomas's raised voice. "I've given you everything. There's nothing more." A sickening thud was followed by silence. When Blackwell emerged, his knuckles were bloodied. "Your husband's being stubborn, ma'am. Insists there ain't no mining payroll. Now we know that's a lie." Eleanor's heart raced. There was no payroll. That had been nothing but a rumor started by jealous competitors, but the look in Blackwell's eyes told her he wouldn't believe the truth. "Please," she said, forcing steel into her voice. "We're simple merchants. Take what's in the safe and go." Blackwell studied her for a moment. "Boys, bring Montgomery out here. Maybe his wife can refresh his memory." 2 men dragged Thomas into the main room. His face was bloodied, one eye swollen shut, but his good eye found Eleanor's and held it with fierce determination. "Don't tell them anything, Ellie," he managed. "There's nothing to tell." Blackwell's hand closed around Eleanor's throat. "Last chance, Montgomery. The payroll location, or your wife starts suffering." "There is no payroll," Thomas shouted. "It's just a rumor. For God's sake, we run a general store." The scarred man's face hardened. "Wrong answer." He nodded to his men. "Take 'em both. We'll continue this conversation somewhere more private." They were bound and thrown over their own horses. Eleanor's heart hammered as they rode away from Silverdale, away from any hope of rescue. After an hour's hard ride, they reached an isolated clearing dominated by an ancient cottonwood tree. The outlaws dragged them from the horses, forcing Thomas to his knees. "Last chance, Montgomery," Blackwell said, drawing his revolver. "Where's the mining payroll?" Thomas looked up, blood streaming down his face but dignity intact. "I've told you the truth. There is no payroll. Kill me if you must, but let my wife go. She knows nothing." Blackwell sighed theatrically. "That's disappointing." He turned to his men. "String him up. Maybe watching her husband dance will loosen the lady's tongue." "No," Eleanor screamed, fighting against the hands that held her. "Thomas!" Her husband's eyes found hers one last time. "Be strong, Ellie. I love you." The horror that followed would burn itself into Eleanor's memory forever. The outlaws throwing a rope over a thick branch, the makeshift noose around Thomas's neck, his feet kicking as they hoisted him up. She screamed until her voice gave out, begging them to stop, offering everything they owned. But Blackwell just watched with cold detachment. When Thomas's struggles finally ceased, Blackwell turned to Eleanor. "Now, Mrs. Montgomery, where's that payroll?" Through tears and rage, she told the truth again. "There is no payroll. It was just a rumor. You've killed my husband for nothing." Something in her broken voice must have finally convinced him. Blackwell's face darkened with fury, not at her, but at the situation. He'd committed murder for a non-existent prize. "Boss, what about her?" asked the wiry outlaw, eyeing Eleanor with malicious intent. Blackwell considered her for a moment. "She's seen our faces, can't leave witnesses. Could have some fun first," another suggested with a leer. "No time," Blackwell decided. "Lawmen might be following those rumors too. Beat her and leave her. If she's lucky, the coyotes will finish her quick." The next minutes were a blur of pain as blows rained down on Eleanor. She didn't fight back. Part of her welcomed death, wanted to join Thomas. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was Blackwell standing over her. "Shame about the payroll," he said dispassionately. "Nothing personal, Mom, just business." When consciousness returned, the outlaws were gone. The merciless sun beat down on her broken body. Thomas's lifeless form swayed gently in the hot breeze, a sight so horrific she had to look away. Grief threatened to consume her, but beneath it something unexpected stirred, a fierce determination to survive, if only to see justice done. With agonizing effort, Eleanor began to crawl. She had no plan beyond putting distance between herself and that terrible tree. Each movement sent waves of pain through her battered body, but she forced herself onward. Thomas deserved justice. She would live to ensure he received it. For 3 days, she crawled and stumbled across the parched landscape, guided only by vague memories of a trading post she and Thomas had passed months earlier. Delirium set in as dehydration and exposure took their toll. Mirages tormented her, cool streams that disappeared as she approached, Thomas walking beside her only to vanish when she reached for him. By the time she found the abandoned trading post as darkness fell on the 3rd day, Eleanor was barely clinging to consciousness. As she collapsed onto the dirt floor, she could no longer tell if the approaching hoofbeats outside were real or another cruel trick of her fading mind. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe. To our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Swift Arrow moved through the landscape like a shadow, his moccasined feet making no sound on the parched earth. At 32, he had earned his place as one of the most respected hunters among the northern Ute. His ability to track game through the most unforgiving terrain, almost supernatural to those who witnessed it. The traders at Fort Garland called him the Ghost for his uncanny talent of appearing and disappearing without warning. Today, he was returning from a successful hunting expedition in the high country, several days' worth of dried venison packed carefully in his parfleche bags. The drought had forced most game to retreat to higher elevations, but Swift Arrow knew the hidden springs and sheltered valleys where deer still gathered at dawn and dusk. He paused on a ridge overlooking the sprawling badlands, his keen eyes scanning the terrain out of habit. Something caught his attention, a faint, irregular disturbance in the dust below, inconsistent with animal tracks. Curious, he descended to investigate. What he found puzzled him, a meandering trail of disturbed earth, occasionally marked with droplets of dried blood. The sign was human, someone crawling, dragging themselves forward with desperate determination. Following the trail, Swift Arrow noted with growing concern that whoever left these marks was severely injured, likely dying without intervention. Among his people, finding such a sign carried an obligation. The Utes believed that paths crossing in the wilderness were seldom accidental. Such encounters were arranged by greater powers for purposes not always immediately understood. The trail led to an abandoned trading post that had once served as a neutral meeting ground between his people and white settlers, before drought and changing trade routes had rendered it obsolete. Swift Arrow approached cautiously. Relations between the Utes and settlers had grown tense in recent years, with broken treaties and encroachment on traditional lands fueling mistrust on both sides. Through a gap in the warped shutters, he glimpsed movement within. A figure collapsed on the dirt floor. Drawing his knife as a precaution, Swift Arrow pushed open the creaking door. The woman lay face down, her golden hair matted with blood and dust. Her clothing, once fine by white standards, was torn and filthy. From the doorway, Swift Arrow couldn't tell if she still breathed. "Hello," he called in English, a language he had learned through years of serving as an occasional guide and interpreter for the army at Fort Garland. The woman stirred weakly, turning her face toward the sound. Even through the bruising and dirt, Swift Arrow could see she had once been beautiful. Now her cracked lips and sunken eyes spoke of severe dehydration. Death hovered nearby, waiting to claim her. Eleanor Montgomery struggled to focus on the figure silhouetted in the doorway. Through the haze of dehydration and pain, she saw a tall man with copper skin and long black hair pulled back with a leather thong. He wore buckskin leggings and a blue trade-cloth shirt, a knife gleaming in his hand. In her delirium, she couldn't tell if he represented salvation or a new threat. "Water," she managed to whisper, the word barely audible. Swift Arrow understood immediately. He secured his knife and moved quickly to her side, kneeling to examine her injuries. The woman had been savagely beaten. Her face was swollen, dried. Blood crusted at her hairline, and from the way she held herself, he suspected broken ribs. Without treatment, she would not survive another day. He uncorked his water skin and gently lifted her head, allowing a small trickle to wet her parched lips. Years of hunting had taught him the dangers of giving too much water too quickly to those in dire thirst. "Small sips," he instructed in careful English. "Too much will make you sick." Eleanor drank obediently, the cool liquid the most exquisite sensation she had ever experienced. As her awareness gradually sharpened, fear began to penetrate her fog of pain. She was completely at this stranger's mercy. "Who?" she managed after a moment. "I am Swift Arrow of the Northern Ute," he replied, his voice deep and measured. "I have found your trail. Who did this to you?" Memories flooded back. Thomas struggling at the end of a rope, Blackwell's cold eyes, the blows raining down on her. Eleanor's body began to tremble uncontrollably. "Outlaws," she whispered. "Blackwell gang. They killed my husband, hanged him, thought we had mining payroll money." Swift Arrow's expression darkened. He knew of the Blackwell gang, murderous bandits who preyed on isolated settlements and travelers. They had raided several trading caravans bound for Ute lands. The previous spring, stealing provisions the tribe had been promised by treaty. "How long ago?" he asked. 3 days, I think. Everything is blurry." Swift Arrow assessed the situation quickly. The woman needed immediate medical attention, beyond what he could provide in this abandoned outpost. His people's summer camp lay a day's ride to the northwest, where Singing Bird, his mother, and the tribe's most skilled healer could tend to her injuries. But bringing a white woman to the camp carried risks. The band's leaders were divided on how to handle increasing tensions with settlers, yet the alternative was to leave her to die, something his honor would not permit. "You need medicine, real healing," he told her. "I will take you to my people's camp. Our healer can help you." Fear flashed in Eleanor's eyes. Stories of Indian captivity had been part of her Eastern upbringing, lurid tales designed to frighten proper young ladies. Seeing her hesitation, Swift Arrow added, "I could take you to the nearest white settlement, but you would not survive the journey. It is 3 days' hard ride to Silverdale, and you are too weak." "Silverdale was my home," Eleanor whispered. "Then you are far from home," Swift Arrow confirmed. "My people's camp is 1 day from here. The choice is yours, but you must decide quickly." Eleanor closed her eyes. Death or trusting this stranger? Those were her options. Thomas was gone. She had no one left. Yet something in this man's steady gaze suggested reliability, a code of Honor she understood despite their different worlds. "I'll go with you," she finally whispered. Swift Arrow nodded once, then set to work. First, he gave her small sips of water and tiny pieces of dried meat to provide strength. Then he gathered what useful items remained in the abandoned trading post. A cracked pottery bowl, a forgotten blanket thick with dust but still serviceable. With practiced efficiency, he constructed a travois from branches and rawhide strips. He carried for emergencies. His paint pony, tethered nearby, would drag the conveyance. Eleanor watched through half-closed eyes as he worked, his movements economical, wasting no energy in the oppressive heat. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked as he secured the final bindings. "Eleanor Montgomery," she replied, her voice slightly stronger from the water and food. "From Silverdale. Before that, Philadelphia." Swift Arrow nodded. "Philadelphia," he repeated, the words strange on his tongue. "A far journey to this place." "Farther than I ever imagined," Eleanor murmured. When the travois was complete, Swift Arrow faced the delicate task of moving her. "This will cause pain," he warned, "but it cannot be avoided." Eleanor steeled herself, gripping the edge of the blanket. "I understand." Despite his gentleness, she couldn't suppress a cry of agony as he lifted her onto the travois. Black spots danced before her eyes, and for a moment, unconsciousness threatened to reclaim her. Swift Arrow placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Breathe slowly," he instructed. "The pain will ease." When her breathing steadied, he arranged the blanket over her, protection against both sun and the evening chill that would follow. With careful movements, he secured her to the travois to prevent her from falling during the journey. "Why are you helping me?" Eleanor asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could consider its wisdom. Swift Arrow paused, considering her question with serious attention. "Among my people, to find someone suffering and turn away brings great shame," he finally answered. "The Creator places people in our path for a reason. Perhaps I was meant to find you." The simple sincerity of his response silenced any further questions. Swift Arrow mounted his pony and began the journey northwest, guiding the animal carefully to minimize jostling the travois. The movement, despite Swift Arrow's precautions, sent waves of pain through Eleanor's battered body. She bit her lip to prevent herself from crying out, tasting blood. Above her, the vast Colorado sky stretched endlessly. The same sky that had witnessed Thomas's murder and her desperate crawl for survival. As the abandoned trading post receded behind them, Eleanor found herself suspended between worlds, her past life shattered beyond recovery, her future entirely uncertain. The steady rhythm of the pony's hooves and the occasional soft commands Swift Arrow gave the animal in his native tongue became her only anchors to consciousness. "Rest if you can," Swift Arrow told her, glancing back. "The journey will be long." Eleanor had tried to follow his advice, but each time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas struggling at the end of a rope. Instead, she focused on the back of the man who had found her, trying to derive strength from his straight posture and unwavering purpose. Whatever lay ahead in the Ute camp, she was alive, a fact that seemed miraculous after the horrors she had endured. And somewhere in the back of her mind, beyond the pain and grief, a spark flickered to life. If she survived, there might yet be justice for Thomas. The journey to the Ute camp tested the limits of Eleanor's endurance. Each jolt of the travois sent shockwaves of pain through her broken body, yet she maintained consciousness through sheer determination. Swift Arrow traveled with deliberate care, choosing the smoothest path possible across the unforgiving terrain, occasionally stopping to offer water and check her condition. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the landscape gradually transformed. The parched badlands gave way to scattered juniper and pinon pine, signaling higher elevation and slightly more hospitable conditions. Swift Arrow guided his pony toward a sheltered ravine where a thin ribbon of water still trickled despite the drought. "We will rest here," he announced, dismounting with fluid grace. "Night comes soon." Eleanor's relief at stopping was overwhelming. Swift Arrow lifted her from the travois with surprising gentleness. Placing her on a bed of pine boughs, he quickly assembled beneath a rocky overhang. The shelter provided protection from both sun and potential predators. With practiced efficiency, he built a small fire, its flames carefully shielded to prevent the smoke from being visible at a distance. From his parfleche bags, he produced dried herbs, which he crushed between his fingers and added to a small pot of water placed at the fire's edge. "Medicine tea," he explained, noticing Eleanor watching him. "It will ease pain and bring sleep." Eleanor studied her rescuer in the firelight. Away from the immediate crisis of the trading post, she could now observe him more carefully. Swift Arrow's face was handsome in a severe way, with high cheekbones and eyes so dark they appeared black in the dim light. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and his hands, though capable of great gentleness as she had discovered, bore the calluses of a life lived by bow, knife, and skill. "You've done this before," she observed, her voice stronger than it had been at the trading post, "tending to injuries." Swift Arrow nodded as he stirred the tea. "I have fought against Comanche and Arapaho, served as scout for army patrols. In battle, knowledge of healing becomes as important as knowledge of weapons, and you've helped white people before." A shadow crossed his features. "Some. Those who deserved help." "How did you decide I deserved it?" Eleanor asked. Swift Arrow was silent for a moment, testing the tea with his fingertip before answering. "You fought to live when most would have. Surrendered. 3 days crawling across Badlands shows a spirit worthy of respect." He poured the tea into a carved wooden cup and helped Eleanor into a semi-sitting position. "Drink slowly. It is bitter, but will help." The tea was indeed bitter, with undertones of mint and other herbs she couldn't identify. Eleanor sipped obediently, too exhausted to question its contents. Within minutes, a blessed numbness began spreading through her limbs, dulling the sharpest edges of her pain. "Tomorrow we reach my people's camp," Swift Arrow said, settling back against a rock. "I must warn you, bringing a white woman there is unusual. Some will welcome you because I have brought you. Others will be suspicious." "Because of who I am, or what I represent?" Eleanor asked, the tea loosening her tongue. Swift Arrow's expression registered surprise at her perception. "Both. The Ute remember broken treaties, stolen land, promises made by white leaders that turned to dust." He paused. "But my mother is our band's healer. Her word carries weight. She will understand why. I brought you. Tell me about her," Eleanor requested, finding comfort in conversation that drew her mind away from memories of Thomas. A rare smile softened Swift Arrow's stern features. "Singing Bird learned healing from her mother and grandmother before her. She knows the power of every plant that grows in our mountains. When sickness came to our band 5 winters ago, she saved many lives while the white doctor at the agency lost most of his patients." "She sounds remarkable," Eleanor murmured, her eyelids growing heavy as the medicinal tea took effect. "Rest now," Swift Arrow advised, noticing her struggle to stay awake. "Tomorrow's journey will require strength." As darkness enveloped their small camp, Eleanor surrendered to the medicine's gentle pull. For the first time since witnessing Thomas's murder, she slept without nightmares. Dawn arrived with painful clarity, the tea's effects having worn off during the night. Swift Arrow was already awake, returning from hunting with a small rabbit, which he quickly prepared and roasted over the rekindled fire. He offered Eleanor the choicest portion. "Eat," he encouraged. "Your body needs strength to heal." Eleanor hadn't felt hunger since the attack, but the rich aroma awakened something primal in her. She ate slowly, savoring each bite of the plain but nourishing meat. Swift Arrow watched with approval before dismantling their small camp with practiced efficiency. The second day's journey proceeded much like the first, with one significant difference. Eleanor found herself more alert, observing the changing landscape with growing interest. Swift Arrow occasionally pointed out features of significance. A particular rock formation used as a landmark by his people for generations, the distant peaks where certain medicinal plants grew only during the highest days of summer. A hidden spring known only to Ute hunters. By midday, Eleanor detected subtle signs that they were approaching inhabited territory. Swift Arrow became more vigilant, occasionally stopping to listen intently before proceeding. When they crested a pine-covered ridge shortly after noon, she finally saw it. The summer encampment of Swift Arrow's band, nestled in a protected valley beside a small lake fed by mountain springs. Unlike the stereotypical images from Eastern newspapers, the camp was not a chaotic cluster of teepees. Instead, about 20 conical dwellings were arranged in a deliberate pattern, with larger family structures positioned around a central gathering area. Several more permanent wooden structures stood at the camp's edge, evidence of the band's adaptation to changing circumstances. Swift Arrow halted at the ridgeline, producing a small flute from his parfleche bag. He played a distinctive sequence of notes, not a melody but a signal. From below, a similar pattern was returned. "I announce our arrival," he explained, replacing the flute, and they acknowledge. As they descended toward the camp, figures emerged from dwellings to observe their approach. Children stopped their play to stare openly at the travois and its unusual occupant. Several men stepped forward, hands near weapons, their postures revealing a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Swift Arrow addressed them in the Ute language, his tone respectful but firm. Though Eleanor couldn't understand the words, she recognized the cadence of explanation and justification. Occasionally, his gestures indicated her injuries, and the men's expressions shifted from suspicion to something more complex. Not quite acceptance, but perhaps understanding. An elderly woman emerged from one of the larger dwellings, her silver-streaked hair arranged in 2 braids wrapped with strips of red cloth. Despite her age, she moved with remarkable grace, her bearing commanding immediate respect from those around her. Even from a distance, the resemblance to Swift Arrow was unmistakable. This could only be Singing Bird. The older woman approached, her dark eyes missing nothing as they assessed Eleanor's condition. Without waiting for further explanation, she issued rapid instructions that set the camp into motion. 2 younger women brought a stretcher of tightly woven cedar bark, and under Singing Bird's supervision, they carefully transferred Eleanor from the travois. "My mother welcomes you to heal under her care," Swift Arrow translated, as Singing Bird spoke directly to Eleanor in the Ute language. "She says your spirit must be strong to have survived such injuries." Eleanor summoned her strength to address the older woman directly. "Thank you for your kindness to a stranger." Though Singing Bird couldn't understand the English words, she seemed to grasp their meaning, responding with a dignified nod before instructing the women to carry Eleanor toward a dwelling set slightly apart from the others. The interior of Singing Bird's healing lodge was unlike anything Eleanor had ever experienced. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the supporting poles, filling the air with complex aromas. Smooth river stones of various sizes were arranged around a central fire pit. Several bedding platforms lined the walls, covered with soft furs and woven blankets. The women placed Eleanor on one of these platforms, then departed after receiving further instructions from the healer. Singing Bird worked with methodical precision, first offering Eleanor water infused with mint, then carefully cutting away her filthy blood-stained clothing. The older woman's face remained impassive as she revealed the full extent of Eleanor's injuries, the deep bruising across her torso, the poorly aligned ribs, the infected cuts from the outlaw's boots and fists. Swift Arrow remained nearby, translating his mother's occasional comments and questions. "She asks where the worst pain is," he relayed, as Singing Bird gently probed Eleanor's ribcage. "Everywhere," Eleanor gasped, then more specifically, "my right side, when I breathe, and my head." Singing Bird nodded as Swift Arrow translated, then spoke at length while mixing various dried plants in a wooden bowl. "My mother says your ribs are broken, but not dangerously so. They have not punctured your lungs, which is fortunate. The wound on your head needs cleaning to prevent fever sickness. She will make poultices for the bruising and bindings for your ribs." For the next hour, Eleanor surrendered herself to Singing Bird's ministrations. The healer worked with gentle but assured movements, applying stinging herbal mixtures to open wounds, binding her ribs with strips of soft buckskin, and creating cooling poultices for the worst of the bruising. Though the procedures were painful, Eleanor sensed the woman's profound knowledge and trusted her methods in a way that surprised her Philadelphia-trained sensibilities. When the treatments were complete, Singing Bird prepared another medicinal tea, adding different herbs than Swift Arrow had used the previous night. As Eleanor drank, the older woman spoke at length to her son. "My mother says you must rest now," Swift Arrow translated. "The medicines will help, but true healing requires time. She has set your ribs as best she can and treated your wounds to prevent the fever sickness. Now your body must do its work." Eleanor's eyes grew heavy as the medicine took effect. "Please thank her," she murmured. "And thank you, Swift Arrow, for bringing me here when many would have left me to die." As consciousness faded, she heard Swift Arrow translating her words to his mother, followed by the older woman's response, musical syllables that somehow conveyed approval despite the language barrier. In that moment, suspended between worlds, Eleanor recognized that whatever lay ahead, she had been granted something precious and unexpected, a second chance at life. For 3 days, Eleanor drifted between consciousness and healing sleep, her body surrendering to the potent medicines Singing Bird administered. When awake, she observed the rhythmic activities of the healing lodge through half-lidded eyes. Singing Bird grinding herbs with a stone mortar, young women entering with fresh water or clean bedding, Swift Arrow's occasional visits to translate and check on her progress. On the 4th morning, Eleanor woke with newfound clarity. The fog of pain and fever had receded, leaving her weak but more aware of her surroundings than she had been since before the attack. Sunlight filtered through the smoke hole at the lodge's apex, creating patterns on the earthen floor. She cautiously tested her limbs, finding mobility returning though accompanied by deep aching. Her ribs, securely bound with Singing Bird's buckskin wrappings, protested less when she breathed. The pounding in her head had subsided to a dull throb. Singing Bird entered, carrying a steaming wooden bowl. Seeing Eleanor awake and alert, the older woman's weathered face creased in a satisfied smile. "Yare," she said, setting down the bowl and placing a hand briefly on Eleanor's forehead to check for fever. "Good morning," Eleanor responded, the exchange becoming something of a ritual between them, despite the language barrier. Using gestures and a few Ute words Eleanor had begun to recognize, Singing Bird indicated she should try sitting up. The healer's strong hands supported her, adjusting fur cushions behind her back for stability. The world tilted alarmingly for a moment before steadying. The bowl contained a rich broth with unfamiliar herbs and small pieces of meat. Singing Bird demonstrated that Eleanor should eat, then busied herself sorting dried plants while her patient attempted to feed herself. The task proved challenging with trembling hands, but Eleanor persisted, recognizing that regaining independence, however small, represented essential progress. Swift Arrow's arrival coincided with the completion of her meal. He paused at the lodge entrance, assessing the change in her condition with evident approval. "You look stronger," he observed, entering and settling cross-legged near her bedding platform. "I feel more present," Eleanor replied, "though still weak." She hesitated, then added, "I've lost track of time. How long have I been here?" 4 days since we arrived, 7 since the attack, 1 week since Thomas died." The thought came unbidden, a blade of grief piercing through her physical recovery. Swift Arrow, perceptive to her sudden shift in emotion, spoke quietly to his mother, who nodded and exited the lodge, leaving them alone. "Grief takes longer to heal than broken bones," he said simply. Eleanor swallowed hard against the tightness in her throat. "Does it ever truly heal?" "Not completely. It changes, becomes part of who you are, like a scar." His hand, unconsciously, touched the faint line along his jawline. "My wife and infant son died 3 winters ago from sickness that swept through our band. I thought the pain would destroy me." The revelation startled Eleanor. In their days of travel, Swift Arrow had revealed little of his personal history. His willingness to share such intimate loss created an unexpected bridge between them. "I'm sorry," she offered, the words inadequate but sincere. He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "My mother says you are strong enough now to hear. What has happened beyond this lodge while you healed?" Eleanor straightened, ignoring the protest from her ribs. "Tell me." 2 days ago, a cavalry patrol from Fort Garland passed near our summer grounds. I spoke with their lieutenant, a man who knows me from my scouting work. I told him about finding you and the attack by the Blackwell gang. Hope and fear surged simultaneously through Eleanor. "What did he say?" "The army has increased patrols searching for Blackwell. Your husband's body was found and taken to Silverdale for proper burial. The settlement believes you also died in the attack." The news of Thomas's burial provided both relief and renewed grief. At least he hadn't been left hanging from that terrible tree, prey to scavengers and the elements. But the thought of Silverdale mourning them both when she still lived created a strange dissonance. "Lieutenant Parker wishes to speak with you when you are able," Swift Arrow continued. "He will return in 3 days. The army is gathering evidence against Blackwell for multiple attacks across the territory." Eleanor absorbed this information, her mind suddenly racing beyond recuperation to justice. "I can identify every member of that gang. I saw their faces clearly. That is why the lieutenant is eager to speak with you. Your testimony could help bring them to justice." Swift Arrow studied her carefully. "But my mother says your body needs more healing before you face such challenges." For the first time since awakening in the healing lodge, Eleanor felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. "I'll be ready in 3 days." Swift Arrow's expression suggested skepticism, but he didn't contradict her. Instead, he changed the subject. "The women of our band have prepared clothing for you. Your own was beyond repair." Eleanor glanced down at the soft buckskin shift she wore, realizing someone had dressed her while she was unconscious. "Everyone has been so kind, despite my being a stranger. A white stranger." "Not everyone," Swift Arrow admitted. "Some elders question your presence here, especially Cloudmaker, who leads our band's council. He fears bringing army attention to our camp." He hesitated, then added, "There is growing pressure from the territorial government to force all Ute onto the reservation at White River. Our band has resisted, maintaining our traditional seasonal movements between summer and winter grounds." Eleanor recognized the vulnerability in his disclosure. He was sharing the political pressures facing his people, trusting her with information that clarified her precarious position as both guest and potential liability. "I understand," she said. "When Lieutenant Parker returns, I could meet him elsewhere, away from your camp." Swift Arrow nodded, appreciation flickering in his dark eyes. That would be wise, but first, you must continue healing. Tomorrow, if my mother agrees, you should try walking outside the lodge. Sunshine and fresh air will strengthen your body. The following morning brought Eleanor's first venture outside the healing lodge, dressed in a beautifully crafted buckskin dress adorned with subtle geometric patterns in blue and red quillwork. She leaned heavily on Singing Bird's arm as they emerged into bright mountain sunshine. The Ute camp revealed itself fully to her now, not just glimpsed through the lodge entrance, but experienced in its entirety. Children paused in their play to stare openly at the white woman who had emerged from the healer's dwelling. Women looked up from tanning hides or weaving baskets, their expressions ranging from curiosity to cautious acceptance to undisguised suspicion. Singing Bird guided Eleanor to a sun-warmed boulder near a small stream that fed into the lake. The location offered both restorative sunshine and a view of camp activities without placing Eleanor directly in the community's center. The older woman helped her sit, then gestured that she would return shortly. Left alone, Eleanor found herself the object of intense scrutiny from several children who had edged closer, fascination overcoming their initial shyness. A small girl, perhaps 5 years old, approached boldly, pointing to Eleanor's golden hair with undisguised wonder. Eleanor smiled at the child, who darted away only to return moments later with companions. Soon, a small cluster of children gathered at a respectful distance, whispering among themselves and occasionally giggling. A young woman carrying an infant on her back approached, speaking gently to the children before turning to Eleanor. "They have never seen hair like sunshine before," she said in careful, accented English. "I am Mourning Dove. Swift Arrow is my brother. My mother asks that I help when she cannot speak with you." "You speak English beautifully," Eleanor said, surprised and relieved. Mourning Dove's expression revealed both pride and something more complex. "I was taken to the mission school at Santa Fe when I was 10. I returned to our people 3 years ago when my father fell ill." The simple statement contained volumes of unspoken experience. Eleanor had read about Indian mission schools, where native children were separated from their families to be civilized, often at great cultural and personal cost. "It must have been difficult," Eleanor offered, "being caught between worlds." A shadow passed across Mourning Dove's features. "Yes, but now I use what I learned to help our people navigate the changes coming to our lands." She gestured toward the curious children. "Would you mind if they ask you questions? They have many about the white woman in my mother's lodge." For the next hour, Eleanor found herself engaged in an impromptu cultural exchange mediated by Mourning Dove's translations. The children's questions ranged from practical, "Why do white women wear such heavy dresses with so many buttons?" to philosophical, "Do white people's spirits go to the same place as Ute spirits after death?" Eleanor answered, as honestly as she could, occasionally asking questions of her own about Ute customs and beliefs. The children's natural curiosity gradually drew other women closer, their initial reserve softening as they observed the respectful exchange. By the time Singing Bird returned, Eleanor was surrounded by a small gathering, demonstrating how she arranged her hair in Philadelphia society, while several women showed her their traditional braiding methods. The healer observed the scene with quiet approval before indicating it was time for Eleanor to return to the lodge. That evening, as Singing Bird applied fresh herbal poultices to Eleanor's healing bruises, Swift Arrow arrived with news. "Cloud, Maker has called council tonight to discuss your situation," he informed her, his expression revealing concern. "There has been word from other bands about increased army movements. Some fear your presence here will bring unwanted attention." "I'll leave tomorrow if necessary," Eleanor offered immediately. "I wouldn't want to bring trouble to people who have shown me such kindness." Swift Arrow shook his head. You are not yet strong enough for such a journey, and my mother would never permit it. A healer does not abandon treatment before healing is complete. He paused. I will speak on your behalf at council. Morning Dove told me of your time with the children today. Such exchanges help build understanding. As darkness fell and the council fire blazed in the center of camp, Eleanor remained in a healing lodge, acutely aware that her fate was being decided by voices she could not hear or understand. Singing Bird had gone to participate, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts. She found herself tracing the intricate quillwork on her borrowed dress, appreciating the artistry and patience it represented. In just a few days, her perspective had shifted profoundly. The Indians she had been taught to fear in Philadelphia now had individual faces, names, stories, and they had saved her life when her own kind had tried to end it. Whatever the council decided, Eleanor knew she had been changed by this unexpected crossing of worlds, perhaps as significantly as by the violent attack that had brought her here. As she drifted towards sleep, her last conscious thought was of Swift Arrow speaking on her behalf, bridging the gap between his people and the strange woman fate had placed in his path. The council's deliberations extended deep into the night. From the healing lodge, Eleanor could hear the rise and fall of voices, sometimes a single speaker holding forth at length, other times multiple voices in heated exchange. Though she couldn't understand the words, the cadence of argument was universal across cultures. Sleep eluded her as she listened to her fate being debated. Exhaustion eventually claimed her shortly before dawn, but her rest was fitful, haunted by images of Thomas and the Blackwell gang intermingled with unfamiliar faces from the Ute camp. She woke to find Singing Bird replacing the poultice on her forehead, the older woman's expression revealing nothing of the council's decision. It wasn't until Swift Arrow arrived mid-morning that Eleanor learned her immediate future. The council was divided, he began without preamble. Cloudmaker and several elders believe your presence endangers our band during already precarious times. The territorial governor has sent new demands that all Utes submit to reservation life by season's end. Eleanor's heart sank. They want me to leave? That was Cloudmaker's position, Swift Arrow confirmed, but others spoke against it, including my mother, who invoked healer's privilege, the tradition that those under a healer's care cannot be turned away until healing is complete. And the decision, Eleanor asked, steeling herself. You may remain until Lieutenant Parker returns. I will meet him away from our camp to discuss your situation. After that, he spread his hands in a gesture of uncertainty. Much depends on the lieutenant's intentions and the army's current. He stanced toward our band. Relief mingled with concern in Eleanor's chest. Thank you for speaking on my behalf. Others spoke more persuasively, Swift Arrow replied. Morning Dove told the council how you engaged with the children, answering their questions with respect rather than dismissal. And River Otter, who lost family to white settlers' violence, surprised everyone by supporting your stay. River Otter. The name was unfamiliar to Eleanor, the elder with the fox fur collar who watched from a distance yesterday. His granddaughter was among the children who approached you. He said, if our youngest ones can find common ground with this woman, perhaps she is not like those who took our hunting lands. The revelation that she had unwittingly gained an advocate touched Eleanor deeply. I would like to thank him, if that would be appropriate. Swift Arrow nodded. I believe he would welcome it. In fact, my mother suggests you should move about the camp more today, if your strength permits. Remaining isolated in the healing lodge only feeds suspicion. The prospect of facing the entire community was daunting, but Eleanor recognized the wisdom in the suggestion. I'll try. That afternoon, supported by Morning Dove's steady arm, Eleanor ventured further into the Ute encampment. Each step remained painful, but determination drove her forward. They paused frequently, ostensibly for Eleanor to rest, but strategically. Near various community activities, at a tanning station, several women worked deer hides with bone scrapers, a process Eleanor had seen from a distance in frontier settlements, but never observed closely. Morning Dove explained each step, occasionally translating questions between Eleanor and the women. "They ask if white women prepare hides," Morning Dove relayed. "Not typically," Eleanor admitted. "In settlements, we purchase leather goods from traders or tanners. In eastern cities, even those connections are lost. Many people never consider how their gloves or shoes began as animal hide." The concept seemed to both amuse and bewilder the women. One offered Eleanor a scraper, gesturing for her to try the technique. Her awkward attempts provoked good-natured laughter that somehow bridged the cultural gap more effectively than words could have. They continued to a group of older women weaving intricate baskets from reeds and grasses. The precision of their work astounded Eleanor, who had paid small fortunes for similar pieces in Philadelphia shops without ever considering the skill their creation required. "These would command high prices in eastern markets," she commented. To Morning Dove, a flicker of interest passed between the weavers when this was translated. One woman, her fingers never pausing in their work, asked a question. "Grey Willow wants to know how much white women would pay for such baskets." Morning Dove translated, "For craftsmanship of this quality, $5 or $6 in Philadelphia." "Shops," Eleanor replied. The answer caused a stir among the women, who conferred rapidly in their language. Eleanor realized she had inadvertently introduced economic possibilities previously unconsidered. Their circuit of the camp eventually brought them to where River Otter sat mending a fishing net outside his dwelling. The elder's weathered face revealed decades of outdoor life, his dark eyes sharp beneath silver-streaked hair. He looked up as they approached, his expression guarded but not unwelcoming. "My brother said you wished to speak with me," Morning Dove explained, then gracefully facilitated the introduction. Eleanor summoned her most respectful demeanor. "I wanted to thank you for supporting my stay in your camp. Your kindness to a stranger is something I won't forget." After Morning Dove translated, River Otter studied Eleanor thoughtfully before responding. "He says he has seen both cruelty and kindness from white people," Morning Dove relayed. "The trick is recognizing which comes from individual nature and which from misunderstanding. He believes you have an honest spirit, though you carry great pain." "The pain is teaching me things I might never have learned otherwise," Eleanor replied carefully. This response seemed to please the elder. He spoke at greater length, gesturing occasionally toward the mountains. "River Otter says pain is like the mountain streams in spring," Morning Dove translated. "It can either flood and destroy everything in its path, or it can be channeled to nurture new growth. He believes you are trying to channel yours." "I'm only beginning to learn how," Eleanor admitted. The elder nodded, then surprised her by extending a small, carved wooden fox from a pouch at his waist. He placed it in her palm, closing her fingers around it while speaking softly. "He says the fox survives by cleverness and adaptation." Morning Dove explained. "It knows when to hide, when to run, and when to stand its ground. These are skills you may need in the days ahead." Eleanor was momentarily speechless at the unexpected gift. "Please tell him I will treasure this, and remember his wisdom." As they continued their circuit of the camp, Eleanor clutched the small carving, drawing strength from both the object itself and the connection it represented. By the time they returned to the healing lodge, her body was exhausted, but her spirit felt more settled than at any time since the attack. That evening, a singing bird applied fresh medicine to her injuries. Eleanor noted with surprise that the swelling in her face had significantly diminished. The older woman nodded with satisfaction, then gestured toward Eleanor's ribs, unwrapping the buckskin binding to examine the bruising. Without swift arrow to translate, their communication relied on gestures and the few Ute words Eleanor had begun to learn. Singing Bird pressed gently along her ribcage, watching Eleanor's face for reactions. The sharp pain had subsided to a persistent ache, still uncomfortable but markedly improved. The healer rewrapped the binding, then sat back, studying Eleanor with an intensity that transcended language barriers. She pointed to Eleanor, then to her own heart, making a breaking motion, with her hands followed by a gesture of something slowly mending. "Yes," Eleanor agreed softly. "That too is healing, though more slowly." Singing Bird nodded, her dark eyes reflecting understanding that needed no translation. She reached into a pouch at her waist and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft rabbit fur. Unwrapping it, she revealed a simple necklace, a polished piece of turquoise suspended on a braided leather cord. Through gestures, Singing Bird conveyed that the stone possessed healing properties beyond the physical. She placed it around Eleanor's neck, her weathered hands lingering briefly on Eleanor's shoulders in a gesture that felt almost maternal. The unexpected kindness brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. In that moment, the cultural differences between them seemed insignificant compared to the universal language of compassion they shared. Dawn brought renewed anxiety as Eleanor prepared for Lieutenant Parker's arrival. Swift Arrow had departed at first light to meet the cavalry officer at a predetermined location away from the camp. The encounter would determine much about Eleanor's immediate future. Whether she would remain with the Utes until fully recovered, be escorted to the nearest settlement, or be enlisted immediately in the pursuit of the Blackwell gang. Mourning Dove helped Eleanor dress in the clean buckskin garments the women had prepared, then arranged her hair in a simple style that accommodated the still healing wound at her temple. The young woman worked in uncharacteristic silence, her usual cheerful manner subdued. "You're worried about today's meeting," Eleanor observed. Mourning Dove nodded. "Lieutenant Parker is unpredictable. Some army officers respect our people's sovereignty, while others see only potential enemies. My brother believes Parker leans toward respect, but military orders sometimes override personal inclinations." "I won't let him bring trouble to your people," Eleanor promised. "You've all risked too much for me already." "We did what was right," Mourning Dove replied simply. "Our way teaches that all actions have consequences that extend beyond the immediate future. Helping you was correct in the moment. Whatever comes after is part of a larger pattern we cannot fully see." The philosophical perspective struck Eleanor as profoundly different from the linear cause and effect thinking of her own culture. Before she could explore this further, a commotion outside indicated new arrivals. Swift Arrow entered the healing lodge, his expression grave. "Lieutenant, Parker is here with 2 soldiers. He has agreed to speak with you alone, but his men remain mounted at the camp's edge. Their presence makes the elders uneasy." "Has he stated his intentions?" Eleanor asked. "Only that he wishes to hear your account of the Blackwell attack directly. I believe his primary interest is gathering evidence against the gang, but he may have secondary motives regarding your presence here." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, ignoring the twinge from her healing ribs. "Then I should speak with him immediately." "Where?" "My mother has offered her healing lodge. She will stay with Mourning Dove while you talk." Minutes later, Lieutenant William Parker ducked through the lodge entrance. Tall and mustached, with the rigid posture of career military, he removed his hat upon seeing Eleanor, revealing sandy hair cut short to military regulation. His blue eyes widened slightly at her appearance, perhaps expecting a more battered victim, or surprised by her native attire. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said formally, "I'm relieved to find you alive. When we discovered your husband's body, we feared the worst. As you can see, Lieutenant, I survived, thanks entirely to Swift Arrow and his people." Parker nodded stiffly. So I understand. Black Hawk has been a reliable scout for several expeditions. His intervention in your case is fortunate. The officer settled onto a fur-covered sitting mat, notebook and pencil in hand. I need to document your account of the attack. Every detail you can recall about the Blackwell gang could prove valuable in bringing them to justice. For the next hour, Eleanor relived the horror of that day, describing each member of the gang in meticulous detail, recounting their words, actions, and the brutal murder of Thomas. Parker took extensive notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but otherwise allowing her to speak uninterrupted. When she finished, he closed his notebook with a grim expression. Your testimony aligns with other reports. The Blackwell gang has escalated from robbery to murder across 3 territories. The army has joined forces with territorial marshals to locate them. And have you made progress? Eleanor asked, leaning forward despite her painful ribs. We believe they're operating from a hidden camp in the San Juan Mountains. Your information about their numbers and armaments is valuable confirmation. He hesitated. Mrs. Montgomery, I must now address your current situation. Lieutenant Parker cleared his throat, his military bearing momentarily softened by what appeared to be genuine concern. Mrs. Montgomery, while I commend your fortitude in surviving such an ordeal, your current accommodation presents certain complications. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. You mean my presence in a Ute camp? Precisely. Word has reached Fort Garland that Thomas Montgomery's widow perished alongside him. Your sudden reappearance, especially in these circumstances, will create quite a stir. I fail to see how my survival should cause anything but relief, Lieutenant. Parker shifted uncomfortably. Under normal circumstances, certainly. But these are not normal times in the territory. Relations between settlers and the Ute bands are increasingly strained. The territorial governor has issued new directives regarding Indian movement and settlement. Eleanor felt a chill at his words, recognizing their implications for her hosts. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm prepared to escort you to Fort Garland immediately. Dr. Simmons can continue your medical care, and we can arrange transport to Silverdale once you're sufficiently recovered. His tone suggested he considered the matter settled, and if I wish to remain here until my recovery is more complete, Eleanor challenged. Parker's expression hardened slightly. Mrs. Montgomery, I'm not certain you fully comprehend your situation. These people, while they've shown you admirable kindness, are under increasing pressure from territorial authorities. Your presence here could be construed as, he searched for a diplomatic term, inappropriate fraternization. The implication infuriated Eleanor. Inappropriate. Lieutenant, these people saved my life when Outlaws left me for dead. Singing Bird has treated my injuries with greater skill than many physicians I've encountered. Their hospitality has been beyond reproach. I don't doubt that, Parker conceded. Nevertheless, there are appearances to consider. A white woman living among Indians, especially a recent widow, will inevitably generate gossip that could damage your reputation and future prospects. Eleanor hadn't considered how her situation might be perceived by white society. The thought that her rescue and healing could become fodder for frontier scandal seemed absurdly unjust. My reputation concerns me far less than my recovery and seeing justice done for Thomas, she replied firmly. Parker studied her with newfound interest. Your devotion to justice is commendable. In fact, it leads to my second purpose in seeking you out. The military expedition tracking Blackwell could benefit significantly from a witness who can positively identify gang members. You want me to accompany the expedition? Eleanor asked, surprised. Not on the actual pursuit, naturally. But stationed at our forward camp, you could identify captured suspects and provide testimony ensuring the right men face charges. He leaned forward. This would dramatically increase our chances of bringing them to justice, Mrs. Montgomery. The proposition stirred conflicting emotions. The chance to help capture Thomas's killers appealed to the growing desire for retribution that had taken root alongside her healing. Yet her body remained far from recovered. Each movement still brought pain, her strength still limited to short walks with assistance. When would this expedition depart, she asked. 3 days from now. Colonel Hartwell is assembling forces from 3 forts to converge on the San Juan region. Parker hesitated. I should mention that Swift Arrow has been requested to serve as lead scout, given his familiarity with the terrain. This information shifted Eleanor's perspective dramatically. If Swift Arrow would be joining the expedition anyway, perhaps this represented an alternative that honored both her debt to the Utes and her commitment to justice. I need time to consider your offer, she said finally, and to consult with Singing Bird regarding my physical readiness for such a journey. Parker appeared ready to object to her continued deference to the Ute healer, but visibly reconsidered. I can grant you until tomorrow morning. I'll return then for your decision. He rose to leave, then paused. Mrs. Montgomery, whatever you decide, I strongly advise that you depart this camp. The political climate is shifting rapidly, and I cannot guarantee how future patrols might react to finding you here. After the lieutenant's departure, Eleanor remained alone in the healing lodge, turning her carved wooden fox over in her hands as she contemplated her options. Each path forward seemed fraught with complications and divided loyalties. Swift Arrow entered, his expression revealing that he had already spoken with Parker outside. The lieutenant has made you an offer to identify Blackwell's men for the military expedition, Eleanor confirmed. He also mentioned you've been requested as scout. Yes, I served with Colonel Hartwell before. He values trackers who know the San Juan wilderness. Swift Arrow settled across from her. What will you tell Parker? I'm uncertain. My body isn't fully healed, but this may be my only opportunity to help bring Thomas's killers to justice. She met his gaze directly. What would you advise? Swift Arrow considered her question with characteristic thoroughness. The military camp would be uncomfortable compared to my mother's lodge, but they have a doctor and supplies. You would be returning to your people's ways. He paused. However, my mother believes your body needs at least another week of her treatments for proper healing. And the risks of my staying here that Parker alluded to? A shadow crossed Swift Arrow's features. His warnings have merit. The territorial government grows increasingly hostile toward Ute bands that resist reservation life. Our summer hunting camp has already remained in one location longer than customary, partly due to your presence. I've become a burden to your people, Eleanor realized with dismay. No, Swift Arrow corrected firmly. You are a guest who has brought unexpected connections and understanding. Morning Dove speaks of starting a basket trading venture based on your knowledge of Eastern markets. The children ask daily when you will share more stories about your world. His words warmed her, yet the weight of decision remained. If I join the expedition, would you continue to look out for me? I trust you more than I trust Lieutenant Parker. Something shifted in Swift Arrow's expression, surprise followed by what might have been gratification. If that is your path, then yes, I would ensure your safety and comfort as much as military protocols allow. Their conversation was interrupted by Singing Bird's arrival. The healer assessed Eleanor with practiced eyes before speaking at length. To her son, my mother says you are healing well but remain vulnerable, Swift Arrow translated. A military camp would delay full recovery. She advises against such a journey if it can be avoided. Eleanor sighed. Please thank her for her counsel. I have much to consider before morning. As twilight descended over the camp, Eleanor sat outside the healing lodge, watching as cooking fires blazed to life and families gathered for evening meals. The rhythm of Ute daily life had become surprisingly familiar in her short time among them. Morning Dove joined her, offering a bowl of venison stew. You look troubled, Eleanor. I'm facing a difficult choice, Eleanor admitted, accepting the food gratefully. She outlined Parker's proposition and the competing considerations tugging her in different directions. Mourning Dove listened attentively, her expression thoughtful. Among our people, important decisions are sometimes made by seeking solitude and listening for guidance from the natural world. Perhaps that would help you find clarity. How does one do that? Eleanor asked. Tonight, if you're strong enough, I could take you to a special place nearby, a flat rock overlooking the valley where many have found wisdom in times of uncertainty. The suggestion appealed to Eleanor. Philadelphia society had provided endless rules for decision-making, but few opportunities for quiet contemplation. I'd like that very much. After darkness fell completely, Mourning Dove led Eleanor along a narrow path that wound gently up a pine-covered slope behind the camp. Though the walk taxed her healing body, Eleanor found her mind clearing with each step away from human activity. The path emerged onto a flat rock outcropping that offered a sweeping view of the valley below. Stars crowded the sky with impossible density, the Milky Way a luminous river overhead. In the distance, the Ute camp's fires appeared as tiny beacons in the vast wilderness. "I'll wait at the path's edge," Mourning Dove said softly. "Take as much time as you need." Alone on the outcropping, Eleanor settled onto the cool stone. The silence was profound, not the absence of sound, but a tapestry of subtle, natural harmonies, undisturbed by human voices or activities. Wind sighed through pine needles, an owl called from somewhere nearby. Small nocturnal creatures rustled in the underbrush. She closed her eyes, allowing the tension of decision to flow from her shoulders. Images arose unbidden in her mind. Thomas, laughing as he taught her to shoot his Winchester, Jedediah Blackwell's cold eyes as he ordered the beating that should have killed her, Swift Arrow kneeling beside her in the abandoned trading post, Singing Bird's weathered hands applying healing, medicines, River Otter presenting the carved fox with unexpected kindness. The turquoise pendant Singing Bird had given her seemed to warm against her skin, a tangible reminder of the unexpected connections she had formed. Eleanor opened her eyes to the star-filled sky, suddenly understanding that her decision wasn't really about military expeditions or healing lodges. It was about who she would become after tragedy had stripped away her former identity. The Philadelphia banker's daughter, who had followed her husband west, had died alongside Thomas at that cottonwood tree. The woman who had crawled through the wilderness and been reborn in a Ute healing lodge was someone new, someone with obligations to both the past and the future. When Mourning Dove eventually approached, Eleanor turned to her with newfound certainty. "I've made my decision." Dawn painted the eastern horizon with pale gold as Eleanor prepared to meet Lieutenant Parker. Swift Arrow and Singing Bird had listened to her decision the previous night, responding with quiet acceptance that suggested they had anticipated her choice. Now, as she straightened her buckskin dress and touched the turquoise pendant for reassurance, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Parker arrived punctually, accompanied by the same two soldiers who had remained at a respectful distance from the camp. His expression registered surprise when Swift Arrow and Mourning Dove flanked Eleanor as she emerged from the healing lodge to greet him. "Good morning, Mrs. Montgomery. I trust you've reached a decision." "I have, Lieutenant." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I will accompany your expedition as a witness on 2 conditions." Parker's eyebrows rose slightly at her directness. "And those conditions would be?" "First, Singing Bird accompanies us to continue my treatment. Her medicines have proven more effective than any I've previously encountered." The officer frowned. Having an Indian woman in a military camp presents certain logistical. "Second," Eleanor continued undeterred, I require your written assurance that this band will not face harassment or forced removal while members are assisting your expedition. Their summer hunting grounds should be respected at least until the season changes naturally. Parker's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. You've become quite the advocate for these people, Mrs. Montgomery. They saved my life, Lieutenant. I believe that merits some consideration. A tense silence stretched between them. Eleanor maintained her composure, aware that Swift Arrow and Morning Dove were watching the exchange intently, though they could not understand all the English words. Finally, Parker nodded. I cannot personally guarantee territorial policy, but I can issue a temporary protection order for this specific band based on their assistance to both you and our military objectives. He glanced at Swift Arrow. Having their healer accompany us could actually prove advantageous. Field medicine is often lacking on extended expeditions. Relief washed through Eleanor, though she maintained her dignified exterior. Then we have an agreement. We depart tomorrow at first light, Parker stated. I'll return with the protection document this afternoon and make arrangements for appropriate transportation given your injuries. After Parker departed to prepare the necessary paperwork, Swift Arrow turned to Eleanor. You negotiated well. Few white women would think to secure protection for a Ute band. Few white women have experienced the kindness I have, Eleanor replied. Besides, I suspect Lieutenant Parker agreed partly because having Singing Bird along serves his interests too. Military doctors are often overwhelmed during campaigns. Swift Arrow smiled slightly. You begin to think like someone who walks between worlds. The observation carried approval rather than criticism. Morning Dove embraced Eleanor gently, mindful of her healing ribs. I will miss our talks. Perhaps when you return. This isn't a final farewell, Eleanor assured her. Whatever happens with the expedition, I won't forget the connections we've formed. As preparations for departure began, Eleanor found herself at an unexpected crossroads. The path toward justice for Thomas now intertwined with her gratitude toward the people who had saved her. Whatever lay ahead, she would move forward as someone transformed, no longer merely a victim of violence, but a woman with purpose forged in the crucible of survival and unexpected friendship. The military expedition departed at dawn. A column of 20 cavalry soldiers led by Colonel James Hartwell, a veteran Indian fighter whose weathered face bore the scars of a decade on the frontier. Eleanor traveled in a modified supply wagon, its bed fitted with blankets to cushion the jolting journey. Singing Bird rode beside her, medicinal pouches secured to her belt, her dignified presence drawing curious glances from the soldiers. Swift Arrow ranged ahead of the main column, returning periodically to confer with Colonel Hartwell about the trail. The soldiers maintained a respectful distance from both the Ute scout and healer, their attitudes reflecting a mixture of ingrained prejudice and grudging acknowledgement of the Indians' essential skills. As the wagons rumbled across the rugged terrain, Eleanor found herself in an unprecedented situation, a white woman traveling with a military expedition, accompanied by a Ute healer, in pursuit of the outlaws who had murdered her husband. The incongruity might have seemed comical had the circumstances not been so deadly serious. Lieutenant Parker rode alongside their wagon periodically, checking on Eleanor's comfort and providing updates on their progress. By midday, the expedition had left the higher mountain valleys and descended into rougher country, a landscape of deep arroyos and jutting mesas where ambush could come from any direction. We're entering territory known to harbor outlaws, Parker explained during one such visit. The Blackwell gang has been reported using a network of abandoned mining camps in these canyons. The colonel has ordered increased vigilance. Eleanor nodded, her hand unconsciously touching the smooth wooden fox carving she now kept in her pocket as a talisman. How long before we reach your forward camp? Another day, perhaps two depending on the terrain and any sign Swift Arrow discovers. Parker lowered his voice. I should warn you, Mrs. Montgomery, camp conditions will be rudimentary. We've arranged a separate tent for you and the healer, but privacy and comfort will be limited. After crawling through the wilderness with broken ribs, Lieutenant, I suspect I can manage frontier military accommodations. Eleanor replied dryly. A hint of respect flickered in Parker's eyes. No doubt you can. Still, if you require anything, to make your situation more tolerable, please inform me directly. After the lieutenant returned to his position, Singing Bird, who had been silently observing their exchange, produced a small pouch of dried herbs. Through gestures and the few English words she knew, she indicated Eleanor should chew them. To combat the pain caused by the wagon's constant jolting, the bitter herbs gradually spread a numbing sensation through Eleanor's body, making the journey more bearable. She watched as Singing Bird expertly rewrapped her rib bindings, the healer's hands moving with assured precision despite the wagon's unsteady movement. Thank you, Eleanor said, not for the first time. For everything. Singing Bird met her gaze with quiet understanding. Help each other, she replied in careful English, one of the phrases Morning Dove had taught her before their departure. Good medicine. The simple exchange carried profound meaning for Eleanor, despite every barrier of language and culture. She and this remarkable woman had formed a bond based on mutual respect and shared purpose. It was a connection that defied the conventions of both their societies. As afternoon waned, the expedition entered a narrow canyon where steep walls blocked the sun, casting long shadows across their path. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the soldiers' posture changed, back straightening, hands moving closer to weapons. Even Eleanor, with her limited military experience, could sense the tactical vulnerability of their position. Colonel Hartwell called a halt, sending scouts ahead to secure the passage. Swift Arrow disappeared into the deepening shadows, moving with the silent efficiency that had saved Eleanor's life days earlier. The waiting column maintained tense silence. Occasional hoofbeats echoed off canyon walls as officers repositioned their mounts. Eleanor found herself straining to detect any sign of Swift Arrow's return, her concern for his safety surprising in its intensity. Lieutenant Parker approached their wagon, his voice low. We'll likely make camp once we clear this canyon. The colonel doesn't want to risk night travel in unfamiliar terrain. Is there danger? Eleanor asked, gesturing toward the watchful soldiers. These canyons have served as ambush points before, Parker admitted. The Blackwell gang has grown bold in recent months, attacking even military patrols when they hold superior position. The thought of confronting her husband's killers so soon sent a chill through Eleanor. She had imagined this moment during her long recovery, but fantasy paled against the imminent reality. If we encounter them, she asked, what happens? The colonel's orders are to capture when possible, but these men have shown no inclination to surrender. Parker's expression hardened. Justice may come at the end of a rope rather than in a courtroom, Mrs. Montgomery. Before Eleanor could respond, a soft bird call echoed through the canyon. 3 notes, then 2. The soldiers tensed, but Colonel Hartwell raised his hand reassuringly. That's Black Hawk's signal, he announced. Path clear ahead. The column resumed its advance, winding through the narrowest portion of the canyon before emerging into a broader valley just as twilight deepened toward night. Swift Arrow waited at the valley entrance, his expression revealing nothing of what he had discovered ahead. Colonel Hartwell issued crisp orders, and the expedition transformed into a well-organized military camp. Tents rose with practiced efficiency. Sentries took positions on surrounding high ground, and cooking fires were established in a defensible ring. As promised, a separate tent was erected for Eleanor and Singing Bird, positioned near the command tent, but with some measure of privacy. Bedrolls and a small brazier for warmth were provided, along with a lantern and basic washing facilities. "Not Philadelphia standards," Lieutenant Parker observed as he escorted them to their quarters, "but the best we can manage under the circumstances." "It's more than adequate," Eleanor assured him. "When will Colonel Hartwell want to speak with me?" "After evening mess. He's particularly interested in your observations about the gang's weaponry and tactics." Parker hesitated. "You should prepare yourself, Mrs. Montgomery. The Colonel is a direct man with little patience for feminine sensibilities." Eleanor straightened despite her aching ribs. "Then we should understand each other perfectly, Lieutenant. I left my feminine sensibilities beside my husband's hanging body." Her blunt statement silenced Parker momentarily. "Very well, I'll return for you in an hour." Left alone with Singing Bird, Eleanor sank onto her bedroll, suddenly exhausted. The day's journey had taxed her still healing body more than she cared to admit. Singing Bird recognized her fatigue immediately, producing a different herbal preparation that she mixed with water from their canteen. As Eleanor drank the bitter but invigorating tonic, sounds of the military camp surrounded them. Men's voices, horses nickering, the metallic sounds of weapons being cleaned. The masculine environment stood in stark contrast to the predominantly female sphere of the Ute Healing Lodge. "Strange place," Singing Bird commented, her limited English nevertheless conveying her assessment accurately. "Very strange," Eleanor agreed. "For both of us." The healer nodded, then began arranging her medicines with methodical care. Eleanor watched, drawing comfort from the woman's calm certainty amid unfamiliar surroundings. A soft scratch at the tent flap announced swift Arrow's arrival. He entered at Eleanor's invitation, ducking beneath the low entrance. Though his expression remained composed, Eleanor had learned to read the subtle signs of tension around his eyes. "You found something," she surmised immediately. Swift Arrow nodded. "Signs of recent camp, abandoned perhaps 2 days ago. 6, maybe 7 men." He met her gaze directly. "One man's tracks match the description you gave. A man who walks with one foot turning outward." Eleanor's breath caught. "Jedediah Blackwell. His right foot turns out when he walks. I noticed it when they took us from the store." Colonel Hartwell believes they are moving toward the old Spanish mines near Mesa Roja. Swift Arrow lowered his voice. "I will scout ahead at first light. The Colonel wants confirmation before committing his force to the difficult terrain." "Is it dangerous?" Eleanor asked, then immediately regretted the question. Everything about tracking outlaws carried danger. Swift Arrow's expression softened slightly. "No more than usual. The Blackwell gang leaves obvious sign. They do not expect pursuit this far into the canyons." Their conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Parker's arrival, announcing that Colonel Hartwell was ready to debrief Eleanor. Swift Arrow departed with a meaningful glance toward Singing Bird, some unspoken communication passing between them. The command tent hummed with activity. Officers poring over maps, dispatches being written, orders relayed to sergeants who ducked, in and out with brisk salutes. Colonel Hartwell dominated the space, his broad-shouldered frame bent over a large map spread across a campaign table. He straightened as Eleanor entered, revealing a face carved by sun and hardship into harsh plains. Beneath iron-gray hair, "Mrs. Montgomery," he acknowledged with minimal courtesy. "Lieutenant Parker speaks highly of your observational skills. I need everything you can recall about these outlaws, their weapons, horses, patterns of behavior." For the next hour, Eleanor provided detailed descriptions, drawing on both her Eastern education's precision and her frontier experience's practicality. She recounted the gang's armaments, Winchester rifles and Colt revolvers with at least one shotgun, described their horses, powerful animals, well-maintained despite hard use, and detailed the command structure. Blackwell giving orders, his lieutenant, the wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth, enforcing them. Throughout her account, Hartwell interrupted with pointed questions that revealed his tactical mind. He showed particular interest in her assessment of Blackwell himself. "You describe him as controlled even during violence," the colonel noted. "That's unusual among frontier outlaws. Most are impulsive, driven by immediate gratification." "He was methodical," Eleanor confirmed. "Even when ordering my husband's hanging, there was no passion in it, just calculation." "Such men are dangerous precisely because they're predictable only in their effectiveness," Hartwell concluded, "not driven by emotion to make mistakes." As the debriefing concluded, the colonel regarded Eleanor with newfound respect. "You've provided valuable intelligence, Mrs. Montgomery. Most civilians, especially women, cannot separate personal trauma from tactical observation as you have. My husband taught me that accurate observation is essential on the frontier, Colonel. I'm merely applying his lessons to finding his killers." Hartwell nodded approvingly. "We resume pursuit at dawn. Lieutenant Parker will keep you informed of developments." He paused. "I understand your Ute healer has considerable skill. My surgeon may consult with her regarding our wounded from last week's skirmish." The request, framed as an afterthought but clearly deliberate, represented a significant acknowledgement of Singing Bird's value. "I'm certain she would be willing to help, Colonel." As Eleanor returned to her tent under Parker's escort, the camp had settled into night routine. Fires banked low, sentries walking their posts, most soldiers already in bedrolls conserving strength for tomorrow's march. Singing Bird waited, her dark eyes questioning. "They ask about bad men?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "They believe we're getting closer. Swift Arrow found their trail." The healer nodded, then gestured for Eleanor to sit so she could examine her ribs. The day's travel had inflamed the healing injuries, and Singing Bird applied fresh poultices with practiced hands. As night deepened around the military camp, Eleanor found herself suspended between contradictory emotions. Anticipation of justice. Drawing nearer, fear of confronting the men who had destroyed her world, and growing concern for Swift Arrow's safety on his dawn scouting mission. Tomorrow would bring them closer to the Blackwell gang, and to the moment when Eleanor would face her husband's killers, not as a victim, but as the architect of their downfall. She touched the turquoise pendant at her throat, drawing strength from its connection to Singing Bird's healing power, and the wooden fox in her pocket, embodying River Otter's wisdom about adaptation and survival. She had adapted. She had survived. Now it was time for justice. Swift Arrow departed camp well before dawn, a shadow moving through darkness with practiced stealth. The landscape ahead, a maze of twisting canyons and sudden drop-offs, favored those who knew how to read its secrets. This was terrain where cavalry strength meant little compared to a scout's intuition and a tracker's eye. He carried minimal equipment: canteen, jerky, knife, and a Winchester repeating rifle, a concession to modern warfare that complemented, rather than replaced, his traditional skills. Cavalry scouts who relied solely on firearms often missed the subtle signs that revealed an enemy's true strength and intention. As the eastern sky lightened to pearl gray, Swift Arrow reached the abandoned outlaw camp he'd discovered the previous day. He circled it methodically, gathering information from details the soldiers would have overlooked: the depth of horse tracks indicating loaded saddlebags, cigar ash suggesting prolonged discussion, a discarded whiskey bottle with a Denver merchant's. Moxie, the Blackwell gang was moving with purpose, not fleeing in panic. This wasn't the behavior of men who believed themselves hunted. Swift Arrow followed their trail as it wound higher into the Red Rock country. The tracks showed the outlaws traveling in close formation rather than spreading out. Another indication. They felt secure. By mid-morning, he'd covered nearly 15 miles, the military camp far behind. The trail led toward a narrow pass between towering sandstone walls, a perfect ambush location. Swift Arrow left the main path, ascending a nearly invisible game trail that paralleled the Outlaws' route but offered concealment along the canyon's rim. From this elevated position, he spotted what the Outlaws had missed, a thin wisp of smoke. Rising from behind a rocky outcropping a mile ahead, someone was watching the pass. Swift Arrow moved forward with increased caution, using every scrap of cover. When he reached a position overlooking the hidden lookout, he confirmed his suspicion. Two men with field glasses scanning the approach to the pass, rifles ready. Their dusty clothes and unshaven faces matched Eleanor's description of Blackwell's men. The main gang had positioned sentries to warn of pursuit, a sophisticated tactic for frontier outlaws. Swift Arrow studied their setup, noting the saddled horses tethered nearby for quick escape and the strategically positioned rifles. These men were prepared for prolonged observation. He carefully backed away from his vantage point, circling wide to avoid detection. If these were advanced scouts, the main gang must be nearby, perhaps at the abandoned Spanish mines Colonel Hartwell had mentioned. Swift Arrow needed to locate their position without alerting the sentries. Miles away at the military camp, Eleanor woke to find Singing Bird already preparing morning medicines. The expedition was breaking camp around them, soldiers dismantling tents and loading wagons with practiced efficiency. "Swift Arrow return soon?" Singing Bird asked, her limited English nevertheless conveying her concern. "I hope so," Eleanor replied, wincing as she sat up. Despite Singing Bird's treatments, her ribs protested the previous day's travel. "Lieutenant, Parker arrived as they finished a simple breakfast. The colonel has ordered us to proceed to the Mesa Junction and await Blackhawk's report. We depart in 20 minutes. "Have you heard anything from him?" Eleanor asked. "Not yet, but that's expected. We won't see or hear from him until he has something definite to report." Parker hesitated. "The colonel suggests you prepare yourself for possible action today. If Blackhawk confirms the gang's location, we'll move immediately." The lieutenant's words sent a surge of both anticipation and dread through Eleanor. After days of recovery and travel, the prospect of confronting her husband's killers suddenly seemed immediate and overwhelming. Singing Bird, observing Eleanor's reaction, laid a steadying hand on her arm. "Strong heart," she said simply. "Justice. Path." The expedition moved out under a cloudless sky, the column proceeding with increased vigilance. Scouts ranged ahead and to the flanks, and the soldiers rode with weapons ready. Eleanor's wagon had been repositioned to the center of the formation, surrounded by protective firepower. Colonel Hartwell rode back periodically to check their progress, his weathered face revealing nothing of his tactical calculations. By midday, they reached the Mesa Junction, a flat, open area where three canyons converged, offering multiple approach routes, but also excellent visibility in all directions. "We'll establish defensive positions and await Blackhawk's return," Hartwell announced. "Lieutenant, see to Mrs. Montgomery's comfort. This heat is punishing." A temporary shelter was erected for Eleanor and Singing Bird, providing shade from the relentless sun. As the temperature climbed, Eleanor found herself scanning the surrounding ridgelines, searching for any sign of Swift Arrow's return. "He is good tracker," Singing Bird reassured her, accurately reading her concern. "Careful, man. The best scout I've worked with," Lieutenant Parker added unexpectedly, approaching with canteens of fresh water. "If anyone can locate Blackwell without being detected, it's Blackhawk." Several miles ahead, Swift Arrow had discovered the Outlaw Stronghold, a complex of abandoned Spanish mining structures nestled in a hidden valley. From his concealed position on an overlooking ridge, he counted 4 men in the camp, with evidence suggesting others were inside the crumbling stone buildings. The setup confirmed his earlier assessment. These men weren't running scared. They had established a defensible position with clear sightlines and multiple escape routes. More concerning was their armament, far heavier than typical outlaws carried. Several rifle cases suggested new Winchester repeaters, and he glimpsed what appeared to be a Gatling gun partially covered by canvas. This wasn't merely a gang in hiding, it was a force preparing for significant confrontation. Colonel Hartwell's 20 cavalrymen might be riding into a deadly trap. Swift Arrow carefully mapped the approach routes, identifying the safest path for the military column and potential ambush points to avoid. As he prepared to withdraw and report back, movement in the outlaw camp caught his attention. A tall man with a distinctive outward-turned right foot emerged from the main building, Jedediah Blackwell himself, unmistakable from Eleanor's description. He was gesturing emphatically to his men, pointing toward various defensive positions around the camp. Swift Arrow watched long enough to confirm the gang's strength and preparedness, then began his careful withdrawal. The information he carried could mean the difference between a successful military operation and a massacre. His return path took him near the sentry's position. As he skirted the lookout post, a dislodged stone clattered down the canyon wall. One of the outlaws jerked to attention, rifle swinging toward the sound. Swift Arrow froze, using the natural camouflage of his buckskin clothing against the sandstone. For long moments, he remained motionless as the sentry scanned the slopes. Finally, the man relaxed, muttering something to his companion about jumpy nerves. The near discovery confirmed the sentry's alertness. Swift Arrow adjusted his route, accepting a longer return journey to ensure the expedition wouldn't be compromised. Back at the Mesa Junction, tension had risen with the afternoon heat. Eleanor sensed the soldiers' growing unease as the hours passed with no sign of their scout. Colonel Hartwell paced the perimeter, occasionally consulting his pocket watch with increasing impatience. "Should we be concerned?" Eleanor asked Lieutenant Parker during one of his visits to their shelter. "Scouting missions often take longer than anticipated," Parker replied, though his expression belied his casual tone. "Blackhawk knows these canyons better than anyone. The colonel will give him until sunset before considering alternatives." The unspoken implication hung in the air. If Swift Arrow didn't return, they would assume something had gone wrong. Capture, or worse. Eleanor clutched, the wooden fox in her pocket, its carved features smooth against her fingers. The prospect of Swift Arrow in danger because of her pursuit of justice created a twisting sensation in her chest, unrelated to her healing ribs. As the sun began its descent toward the western ridges, casting long shadows across the mesa, a sentry's call broke the tense silence. "Rider approaching from the south ridge." All eyes turned toward the indicated slope. A solitary figure on horseback descended the rocky trail, Swift Arrow returning at last, his posture revealing urgency even at a distance. Colonel Hartwell ordered the camp to prepare for immediate action. Eleanor watched as Swift Arrow rode directly to the command position, dismounting with fluid grace despite what appeared to be hours of difficult riding. The scout's report, delivered with characteristic precision, transformed the expedition's mood from tension to focused determination. Officers gathered around maps, orders were issued in hushed tones, and soldiers checked weapons with renewed purpose. Lieutenant Parker approached Eleanor's shelter, his expression grave. "Blackhawk has located the gang. They're entrenched at the old Santa Teresa mine works with substantial firepower. When do we move?" Eleanor asked, already knowing the answer. "Tonight, under cover of darkness." Parker hesitated. "The colonel requests your confirmation of something from Blackhawk's report. Does Blackwell favor sentries working in pairs rather than alone?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed immediately. "Even at our store, his men always worked in twos, one watching while the other acted." Parker nodded, this detail apparently confirming some aspect of their approach strategy. Rest while you can, Mrs. Montgomery. We move in 3 hours. As the lieutenant departed, Swift Arrow appeared at their shelter entrance, his normally impassive face showing subtle signs of fatigue. Singing Bird immediately offered him water and began examining a long scratch on his arm, evidence of his difficult journey. "You found them," Eleanor said simply. Swift Arrow nodded. "Blackwell and at least 8 men, well armed and prepared for defense." His dark eyes met hers directly. "They are not ordinary outlaws. They have military weapons and tactical training." The implications were clear. Tomorrow's confrontation would be dangerous, beyond the usual risks of frontier justice. "The colonel has a plan?" Eleanor asked. "Yes, a good one, I believe." Swift Arrow accepted food from Singing Bird, eating with deliberate control despite obvious hunger. "But you should understand, these men will not surrender easily. There will be bloodshed." "I'm prepared for that," Eleanor replied, surprising herself with the cold certainty in her voice. As darkness fell over the mesa, the expedition transformed into a strike force. Horses were muffled with cloth wrapped around their hooves, weapons checked and loaded, ammunition distributed. The column would move silently through the night to reach striking position before dawn. Eleanor watched these preparations with growing resolve. Tomorrow she would face the men who had destroyed her world and left her for dead. Justice or vengeance was finally within reach. The military column moved through darkness like a phantom army, each soldier maintaining precise distance from the next, every sound muffled by careful preparation. Eleanor and Singing Bird followed in a single wagon with Lieutenant Parker as escort, far enough behind the main force to remain safe from immediate combat, but close enough to provide identification, if needed. The night air carried the scent of sage and dust, punctuated occasionally by the lonely call of a hunting owl. Dawn was still hours away when Colonel Hartwell called a halt in a sheltered draw 2 miles from the Spanish mineworks. From here, the soldiers would proceed on foot to surround the outlaw stronghold before first light. Swift Arrow appeared beside their wagon, materializing from the shadows with characteristic silence. "The colonel wishes to speak with you," he told Eleanor. Final preparations. At the command position, Colonel Hartwell stood over a rough map sketched in the dirt, illuminated by a single shielded lantern. His face looked carved from granite in the harsh light. "Mrs. Montgomery," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Black Hawk confirms Jedediah Blackwell is present with approximately 8 men. We'll encircle their position before dawn, then offer one chance for surrender." "Do you expect them to take it?" Eleanor asked. The colonel's expression hardened. "No, men like Blackwell don't surrender, but military protocol demands we make the offer." He gestured toward the map. "Once engagement begins, you'll remain with Lieutenant Parker and your healer in this protected ravine. If we capture any suspects alive, we'll bring them to you for identification." The clinical precision of his battle planning struck Eleanor with its finality. After weeks of pursuit and recovery, justice for Thomas would be decided in the next few hours. "I understand, Colonel. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity." Hartwell studied her with unexpected intensity. "This isn't just military duty. Mrs. Montgomery, men who murder civilians and ambush military patrols deserve whatever comes to them." He straightened. "Get some rest if you can. Parker will position you when it's time." In the pre-dawn darkness, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep despite Singing Bird's calming tea. The healer seemed to understand, sitting beside her in companionable silence as they waited for the battle to begin. When Lieutenant Parker finally came for them, the eastern sky had just begun to lighten. He led them to a sheltered position in a narrow ravine with clear views of the mine works below. The soldiers were already in position, invisible among the rocks, but present nonetheless. "Colonel Hartwell will issue the surrender demand when there's enough light for clear visibility," Parker explained, handing Eleanor a pair of field glasses. If they refuse, our sharpshooters will target their sentries first. Through the glasses, Eleanor could make out the crumbling stone buildings of the abandoned Spanish mine. A thin plume of smoke rose from what must be a cooking fire. There was no indication the outlaws suspected their presence. As sunlight crept across the valley floor, a bugle call shattered the morning stillness, the military signal demanding surrender. The effect on the outlaw camp was immediate. Men scrambled from buildings, reaching for weapons, looking wildly for the source of the sound. Colonel Hartwell's voice boomed across the distance, amplified by the canyon walls. "Jedediah Blackwell, you are surrounded by United States cavalry. Throw down your weapons and come forward with your hands visible." For a moment, the outlaws froze in confusion. Then a tall figure emerged from the main building, Blackwell himself, unmistakable even at this distance. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat at the sight of the man who had ordered Thomas's hanging. Blackwell scanned the surrounding ridges, visibly calculating his options. Then, instead of surrender, he dove for cover, shouting orders to his men. Gunfire erupted immediately, the sharp crack of rifles from multiple positions as the cavalry sharpshooters opened fire. The battle unfolded with brutal efficiency. The soldiers' superior position and discipline quickly told against the outlaws' desperate resistance. Within minutes, 3 of Blackwell's men lay motionless in the dusty yard, while the others retreated to the stone buildings. "They're cornered." "Now," Parker observed grimly, "the colonel will order an advance on the main building." As if on cue, cavalry soldiers began moving down the slopes in coordinated groups, using boulders and depressions for cover as they closed in on the mineworks. The outlaws' gunfire became increasingly erratic, suggesting dwindling ammunition or growing panic. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the battlefield cacophony, the distinctive mechanical chatter of a Gatling gun. One of the outlaws had reached their hidden weapon, unleashing a deadly hail of bullets that forced the advancing soldiers to dive. "For cover! Damnation!" Parker muttered. "Blackhawk reported they might have one, but we hoped to advance before they could deploy it." The battle's momentum shifted instantly. Pinned down by the devastating firepower, the cavalry couldn't advance. Without sustaining heavy casualties, Colonel Hartwell's voice could be heard shouting orders for his men to hold position. Swift Arrow materialized beside their shelter, his Winchester rifle in hand. "There's another way," he said tersely. "A mine shaft that emerges behind their position. I found it during reconnaissance." Lieutenant Parker hesitated only briefly. "Can you reach the Gatling gunner?" "Yes, but not alone." Swift Arrow's gaze shifted to Eleanor, surprising both her and the lieutenant. "Mrs. Montgomery knows Blackwell's face better than anyone. If we encounter him in the tunnels, her identification could prevent fatal mistakes." "Absolutely not," Parker objected. "Mrs. Montgomery is a civilian witness, not a combatant." "I'll go," Eleanor stated firmly, rising to her feet despite the protests of her healing ribs. "Lieutenant, your men are dying out there while we debate. I've come too far to wait safely in the background now." Parker looked torn between military protocol and battlefield necessity. "The colonel would never authorize this." "The colonel is occupied," Swift Arrow pointed out, "and we're wasting time." A cavalry soldier's scream punctuated his statement as another burst from the Gatling gun raked the battlefield. Parker's resistance crumbled. "Go, but for God's sake, keep her behind you, Blackhawk." He turned to Eleanor. "If you see Blackwell, identify him but take no risks. Leave the rest to the scout." Singing Bird grasped Eleanor's hand briefly before. They departed, pressing something into her palm, a small leather pouch. "Protection," she said simply. The mine entrance was concealed behind a rockfall, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Swift Arrow led Eleanor through the narrow opening into cool darkness. Striking a match to light a small lantern he had carried concealed beneath his buckskin shirt. "Stay close," he murmured. "The tunnels branch in several directions." They proceeded. Cautiously, the sounds of battle muffled by layers of rock above them. The mine had been abandoned for decades, its timber supports rotting, occasional cave-ins narrowing the passages. Swift Arrow navigated with unerring confidence, turning at junctions that looked identical to Eleanor's untrained eye. "How do you know this place so well?" she whispered. "My people worked these mines when the Spanish first came," he replied. "The knowledge was passed down, even after the mines were abandoned." The passage gradually angled upward, the air growing fresher. Swift Arrow extinguished the lantern, indicating they were nearing an exit. The sounds of battle grew louder. They were approaching the rear of the outlaw position. "The opening is behind the equipment shed," he explained in a near whisper. "The Gatling gun is positioned 20 yards beyond, at the corner of the main building. From there, we can approach undetected." Eleanor nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might betray their position. The wooden fox carving pressed against her palm inside her pocket, a talisman of courage as they prepared to face her husband's killers. The mine exit opened into blindingly bright sunlight. Swift Arrow eased through first, ensuring the shed concealed them from outlaw sentries. Eleanor followed, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the glare. From their position, they could see the Gatling gunner, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth that Eleanor recognized immediately as Blackwell's lieutenant. The mechanical weapon continued to spew bullets, keeping the cavalry pinned down behind. Inadequate cover, Swift Arrow raised his Winchester, taking careful aim. The gunner never saw the shot that killed him, slumping forward over his weapon as the battlefield momentarily fell silent. The sudden cessation of the Gatling gun created confusion among the outlaws. Taking advantage of the moment, Colonel Hartwell bellowed orders for his men to advance. The cavalry surged forward, converging on the mine buildings from multiple directions. In the chaos, Eleanor spotted a familiar figure ducking between buildings. Jedediah, Blackwell himself, moving toward the stables where horses were tethered, clearly planning escape rather than a last stand. "There!" she hissed to Swift Arrow. "Blackwell, heading for the horses!" Swift Arrow pivoted, raising his rifle, but Blackwell disappeared behind a stone wall before he could fire. "We need to cut him off before he reaches the back trail," the scout said, already moving. They circled wide around the firefight consuming the main yard, where the remaining outlaws were engaged in desperate combat with the advancing soldiers. Eleanor struggled to keep pace with Swift Arrow's swift, silent movement, her healing ribs protesting each ragged breath. They reached the stable entrance moments before Blackwell emerged leading a saddled horse. The outlaw froze at the sight of Swift Arrow's leveled Winchester, his cold eyes darting between the scout and Eleanor. Recognition dawned in his face as he stared at Eleanor. "Well now," he drawled, "if it ain't Mrs. Montgomery, back from the dead." His hand hovered near his holstered revolver. "Seems my boys were sloppy." "Don't," Swift Arrow warned, his rifle unwavering. "Your men are defeated. Surrender now." Blackwell's expression revealed nothing but cold calculation. "I don't believe I will." His gaze fixed on Eleanor. "Nothing personal about your husband, Mom. Just business. Though I admit you've proven more trouble than expected." "Thomas deserved justice," Eleanor replied, her voice steadier than she had expected. "As do the others you've murdered." Something shifted in Blackwell's posture, a nearly imperceptible tensing that Swift Arrow recognized before Eleanor could process it. The scout fired a split second before Blackwell could draw, the bullet striking the outlaw's shoulder and spinning him backward. Blackwell's revolver clattered to the dirt as he fell, blood spreading across his shirt. Swift Arrow kicked the weapon away, then bound the outlaw's hands despite his pained protests. "You should have killed me," Blackwell snarled, glaring at Swift Arrow. "That would be too easy," Eleanor responded, stepping forward to look directly into the eyes of her husband's murderer. "You'll stand trial for what you've done. Every person you've harmed will have their day in court." The sounds of gunfire had diminished across the compound, suggesting the battle was reaching its conclusion. Swift arrow secured Blackwell's wound with practiced efficiency, ensuring he would survive to face justice. The cavalry will be searching for remaining outlaws, he told Eleanor. We should bring him to Colonel Hartwell. As they marched the captured outlaw toward the main yard, Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions. Not the triumphant satisfaction she had imagined, but something more nuanced. Justice had been set in motion, but Thomas remained gone. The hollow space his death had created couldn't be filled by Blackwell's capture. Colonel Hartwell met them with surprised approval, immediately taking charge of the prisoner. 3 dead, 4 captured, including Blackwell, he reported. 2 escaped into the canyons, but they won't get far. My men are in pursuit. He studied Eleanor with newfound respect. Lieutenant Parker told me of your initiative, Mrs. Montgomery. Unorthodox, but effective. In the aftermath of battle, the military camp established order with practiced efficiency. The dead were respectfully covered. The wounded, both soldiers and captured outlaws, treated by the expedition's surgeon, with Singing Bird providing unexpected assistance that drew grudging appreciation from the military doctor. Eleanor found herself sitting alone on a boulder overlooking the battlefield, the wooden fox turning over and over in her hands as she contemplated the journey that had brought her to this moment. The physical pain of her injuries seemed insignificant compared to the emotional landscape she now navigated, neither the person she had been before Thomas's murder nor entirely comfortable with who she had become. Swift Arrow approached, offering a canteen of fresh water. The colonel says we return to Fort Garland tomorrow. Blackwell and the surviving gang members will stand trial next month. Eleanor nodded, accepting the water gratefully. What happens after that? To you and Singing Bird, I mean. We return to our people, he replied simply. The summer camp will be moving soon to follow the hunting. And you? The question caught Eleanor unprepared. Throughout her recovery and pursuit, she had focused solely on survival and justice. The future beyond this moment had remained unexamined. I don't know, she admitted. Silverdale holds nothing. For me now, I could return east, I suppose, though Philadelphia seems like another life entirely. Swift Arrow settled beside her, his customary reserve softened by all they had experienced together. Among my people, when great change comes, we sometimes seek guidance through the medicine journey, time alone, in sacred places to listen for the path ahead. That sounds wiser than rushing toward the first available option, Eleanor acknowledged. My mother says your spirit has been reborn through fire, Swift Arrow continued. The person you were died beside your husband. The person you are becoming has only begun to find her way. The insight struck Eleanor with its simple truth. She had been focused on ending something, bringing Blackwell to justice without fully considering what might begin afterward. Lieutenant Parker mentioned that Fort Garland needs a schoolteacher, Swift Arrow added. The previous one returned east last winter. The position remains unfilled. A schoolteacher? The suggestion surprised Eleanor. I have no training for such work. You adapted to frontier life when many Eastern women could not. You learned some of our language and customs when most settlers refused to try. You survived what should have, and killed you. A rare smile touched his features. Teaching multiplication tables seems simple by comparison. The idea took root as Eleanor considered it. Fort Garland stood at the crossroads between settler communities and native territories. A schoolteacher there might serve children from both worlds, perhaps building bridges of understanding where suspicion currently reigned. I'll consider it, she promised, after the trial. As sunset painted the western cliffs in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor gazed across the battlefield where justice had finally been secured. The journey that had begun with unspeakable loss had carried her through territories both physical and spiritual she could never have imagined. The path ahead remained uncertain, But for the first time since watching Thomas die, Eleanor felt something. Beyond grief and determination, a flicker of possibility, of life continuing not merely as survival, but as meaningful creation. She touched the turquoise pendant at her throat and the wooden fox in her pocket, tangible reminders of the unexpected connections that had sustained her. Whatever came next, she would carry these tokens of a journey that had broken her utterly, only to reassemble her into someone stronger at the broken places. Justice had been her purpose. Now perhaps she could discover what healing might truly mean, not just for her body, but for her life in this harsh, beautiful frontier that had taken everything from her, then offered something entirely new in return. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.